what is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? Now, the answer to this question is fundamental for you enjoying doing research, understanding how to do research, and having a successful career in social sciences disciplines, whether you work as a consultant or you work in academia or you're actually a student. This video is applicable to anyone who is involved in sociology, social psychology, or marketing. And marketing is my area of passion and expertise. So you'll hear me using a lot of marketing examples. In this video, I'll talk about several things. I will mention the difference between qual and quant. These are the other two names that these techniques are famous for. I will also talk about the applicability of each of these techniques to different social phenomena or problem that we are investigating. And where applicable, I will also give you a lot of examples looking at the focus of each of this technique so that you can become an expert in problems that can be investigated using qualitative research, or you can easily spot the problems that should be or can be investigated using quantitative research. Like I said before, qualitative and quantitative research represent the two family of research techniques or tools that are available to us as social scientists. And in fact, there are a lot of difference between those techniques. Visually, I like to summarize qualitative research as a bunch of text and words. That's why you see that word cloud in here. And quantitative research, I like to visualize using numbers. The first difference between qualitative and quantitative research is in the type of research that we are doing overall. With qualitative, we want to explore, in other words, go in depth and explore something in as much detail as possible. So keep that word explore in mind because it will help you to memorize what qual is about. With quantitative research, on the other hand, you want to explain or you want to examine something. So these are the verbs or the words that are most typically used when we use qual or quant. And if you read journal paper articles, if the researchers done a really good job, then they would refer to qualitative research as explore. So they would say, the purpose of this paper is to explore X, Y, and Z. And if it's a quantitative paper, they should be saying, the purpose of this paper is to explain how A is related to B, or to examine how X causes Y, or so on and so forth. Within the quantitative family of research techniques, we also want to either describe a phenomenon using numbers, or we engage in causal research, which this channel is all about because I mostly focus on experiments on this channel. The second difference between those two techniques is actually in data collection methods. You will notice that with qualitative research, because we want to explore something in depth, in detail, we would be using techniques that allow us to do that. And very often that would be in-depth one-on-one interviews when you get a person in a room or you do it over digital technologies on Teams or Zoom and you ask them questions and you're trying to understand why they are behaving a particular way. Another technique is focus groups, where you get a group of people in a room or online and you discuss a particular phenomenon that you are investigating. Or you engage in ethnography or observations where you have a deep dive into community of consumers that applies to ethnography, or you observe how they interact with the brand or how they interact in a particular environment. And that's what you do using observations. With quantitative research, very often we use surveys, but also experiments. Another difference between qual and quant is in the types of questions that we will be asking. Because with qual, we really want to have a deep dive, we want to explore. We have semi-structured nature of questions during our interviews or focus groups. And we don't want to limit ourselves to very structured lists because we allow for room for exploration or an understanding of different themes as they emerge during the conversation and observation. That's why the order of the question can also vary. With quantitative research, because we are dealing with surveys, usually they're carried out online, They are very structured. The order and the sequence of all questions is predetermined. There is a skip logic or there is a screen out logic, and one question follows the other one. And we usually design our surveys in such a way that it's not cognitively overloading. And there's a very nice logical progression from one set of block of questions to the next set of questions. The next difference between qualitative and quantitative research is actually in the sample sizes that we are dealing with. And usually that is linked to representativeness of our samples towards the overall population. Usually with qualitative research, because we want to go in depth, sometimes we go for quality. And this is what qual stands for. But don't get me wrong, there is also quality in terms of doing good job when we are engaging in quantitative research. So do not get me wrong, quality should be everywhere, whether you do qualitative or whether you do quantitative research. But because we want to go in depth, understand the phenomena from different angles, from all the perspectives, ask a lot of why questions, we dealing with smaller sample of consumers or individuals in qualitative research, which means that sometimes we may not be able to generalize our findings to the larger population. But the purpose with qual is different. We want to explore. Very often it's the initial phase of discovery. That's why it's okay that it may not always be representative of the wider population. Now, with quantitative research, the samples are usually larger, and very often we try to compute the required or the minimum sample size so that we can be confident as managers or as researchers in the validity or in the trends that we are observing in our data in consumers. And ultimately, we want to draw samples that are representative of the population. That's the ideal case scenario. Sometimes you may be using different sampling methods, which are non-probability, like snowballing, and that's a different ball game. Another difference is in what's required from us as researchers. Usually with qualitative, you need to be able to ask questions. So the art of asking question is crucial. An ability to react on the spot and understand where you need to probe more depth and ask probing or clarification questions or lettering question is super important here. And also your skills in interpreting what you observe, in what you see, in what consumers or individuals tell you is the key for qualitative research. Quantitative research requires, as the name suggests, quantitative skills, data analysis skills, data inference skills, data modeling skills. The last difference between the two techniques is in the generalizability of the results. And that is linked to actually sample sizes very often. Because with qual, we deal with smaller sample sizes, our ability to generalize what we've observed to the wider population may be limited. So here, as a researcher, you may need to be a bit more careful in terms of how you present your recommendations or your inferences. You may say, well, in the sample of interviewed people, this is what we observed. So always be very careful. The smaller your sample size is, the less generalizable your results may be. So more careful you should be, especially if you do marketing research for industry. And sometimes the focus, like I said before, could be just to get the preliminary insights into the problem. So we don't know what's going on in consumers' minds. We don't know other aspects of individuals' behavior. So let's ask them to talk to us and tell us why they feel this way or why they process information in this way. With quantitative research, on the other hand, because sample sizes are larger, the generalizability is not limited. So here we can actually make inferences about facts or we can try to make predictions, but this is possible only and only if you use probability sampling. If you try to draw your sample from a representative population and you did not use non-probability sampling, because if the latter is the case, again, like with qualitative research, you need to be more careful and cautious in your recommendations. You may need to say, well, based on the sample that was used in this research, this what was observed. So you always need to be mindful of the size of the sample that you're dealing with, how you invited those participants to take part in your research, and whether you can generalize your results to the wider population. With qualitative research, the key aspects that we are analyzing are very different from quant because we may be dealing with words, visuals, videos, or observations. With quantitative, obviously, we are dealing with numbers, perceptions or attitudes that have been captured as a number, as a rating scale, or we've collected some other numerical data that we are tracking over time, or you're looking at your customer relationship CRM database and you're analyzing this to understand profitable and non-profitable segments, or you want to understand consumer baskets. Now, I hope this provides a very nice summary for you for the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. And one more thing which I wanted to say is that experiment as a special way of measuring a social phenomena or consumer behavior or consumer aspect lends itself to a quantitative family of research tools. And this is why I have these and highlighted both for the experiment and quantitative research so you can memorize it better. This is everything for this video. I hope that you now know the difference between qual and quant and will not make a mistake.